Hello, and welcome to Infidelity Tales Lab. Your support means everything to us. We'd love to know, which geographical location are you joining from today? At home? On the go? Share with us below. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Shadow Investor. Maxwell Reed surveyed Chicago's gleaming skyline from his modest office window. At 42, he possessed the weathered hands of someone who'd built something from nothing, though few knew the extent of his empire. To most, he was just another mid-level investment advisor at Pinnacle Financial, making a comfortable but unremarkable living. That's exactly how Maxwell wanted it. Mr. Reed, his assistant Fiona knocked lightly. Your wife called. She wants to know if you'll be joining her at the Townsend Charity Gala tonight. Maxwell suppressed a grimace. Tell her I'll be there. Also, Mr. Hargrove approved your investment portfolio. You were right about the tech startup valuations. A thin smile crossed Maxwell's face. His colleagues constantly underestimated him, a pattern he'd leveraged his entire life. Born to a third-generation steelworker in Pittsburgh, Maxwell had watched his father labor 60-hour weeks only to lose everything in the mill closures. But where others saw bankruptcy, teenage Maxwell saw opportunity. He began buying distressed properties around the shuttered factories with money saved from 3 simultaneous jobs. By 22, he owned 12 rental properties. By 30, he'd expanded into silent restaurant investments across 4 states. Maxwell constructed his empire like a spider weaving an invisible web. Through shell companies, minority stakeholder positions, and strategic partnerships, where his name never appeared on public documentation. His wife, Vanessa, believed they lived comfortably on his financial advisor's salary, never questioning how they afforded their Lake Michigan vacation home. That evening, Maxwell returned to their North Shore residence. The 3-bedroom colonial looked modest compared to neighboring mansions, another calculated choice. There you are. Vanessa swooped into the foyer, already dressed in a designer gown that cost more than most people's monthly rent. At 38, she remained strikingly beautiful, with cinnamon hair and cutting green eyes currently narrowed in irritation. We're supposed to be there in an hour. I'll be ready in 20 minutes, Maxwell replied, loosening his tie as he climbed the stairs. Their marriage had been passionate once. Vanessa Caldwell, daughter of a Michigan Avenue boutique owner, had fallen for Maxwell's quiet confidence and unassuming ambition 14 years ago. Back then, she'd admired his blue-collar roots and straightforward manner. But lately, he sensed her growing discontent, especially around her increasingly affluent social circle. As he showered, Maxwell recalled overheating her phone conversation last week. It's just embarrassing, Trish. Everyone else's husband is a partner or director of something. Maxwell's been at the same desk for 12 years. It hadn't truly bothered him. Maxwell knew exactly who he was and what he was worth. The clandestine nature of his investments was deliberate, a lesson learned watching his father lose everything to creditors. What people couldn't see, they couldn't take. At the gala, Maxwell stood quietly nursing a scotch while Vanessa flitted between social groups. He nodded politely when introduced, but otherwise remained on the periphery, observing, calculating, his mind already on tomorrow's acquisition of 3 undervalued waterfront properties. Maxwell Reed, right? A deep voice interrupted his thoughts. He turned to find Dominic Russell, a neurosurgeon whose reputation preceded him. Maxwell had researched everyone in Vanessa's social orbit, as he did with any potential connection. Dr. Russell, enjoying the evening? Maxwell offered a firm handshake. Call me Dom. And frankly, these events are tedious but necessary evils. The doctor's candor was refreshing. Your wife mentioned you work in finance? Investment advisory. Nothing particularly exciting. Dominic studied him with unexpected interest. Funny, I've always found people who downplay their work are either terrible at it or exceptional. Maxwell allowed a genuine half-smile. Sometimes it's just work. I doubt that. My brother-in-law mentioned a Maxwell Reed just orchestrated the Highland Restaurant Group acquisition. Remarkable deal structure, apparently. Different Maxwell Reed, I assume. A brief silence hung between them as Maxwell considered his response. He'd kept his professional achievements separate from his personal life for so long that the boundaries rarely blurred. Financial sectors full of people with similar names. Maxwell deflected smoothly. Of course, Dominic nodded, unconvinced. Well, whoever that Maxwell Reed is, he's apparently something of a silent genius. Across the room, Maxwell spotted Vanessa laughing with a tall, athletic man he recognized as Blake Sullivan, recently divorced hedge fund manager and newest member of the country club board. Something in their body language, the leaning in, the lingering touch on his arm, triggered Maxwell's finely tuned situational awareness. "If you'll excuse me," Maxwell said to Dominic, already calculating probabilities and contingencies as he walked away. By evening's end, 3 facts had become clear. Vanessa was growing increasingly embarrassed by what she perceived as his career stagnation. Blake Sullivan had initiated a deliberate pursuit of his wife. And most critically, Maxwell had spotted weakness in Blake's investment strategy that suggested his hedge fund was over-leveraged. Knowledge was power, and patience, Maxwell's defining characteristic, was how he wielded it. Chapter 2. The Facade Cracks. 3 months after the charity gala, Maxwell sat across from Leo Conway, his oldest friend and the only person who knew the full extent of his business holdings. The Shoreline development passed final approval, Leo reported, sliding documents across the conference table. Once construction begins, property values in the adjacent neighborhood will double. Your investment there will quadruple conservatively. Maxwell nodded. And the restaurant group? 11 locations, all profitable. The Chicago flagship is performing beyond projections. Rossetti's has become the reservation everyone wants but can't get. Leo paused. Which reminds me, didn't you mention Vanessa wanted to dine there? She's mentioned it several times. Apparently, her friends consider it a status symbol. Leo's expression grew concerned. Have you considered telling her? About any of it? Maxwell straightened a perfectly aligned pen on the table. Our arrangement works. Vanessa enjoys her lifestyle without the complications of knowing its true source. Does it work? You've seemed distracted lately. Maxwell hesitated, then reached for his phone, pulling up a text message. This came through accidentally 3 weeks ago. Vanessa meant to send it to someone else. Leo read the screen. He canceled again. Working late, supposedly. Meet me at our spot at 8? You think she's having an affair? I know she is. Maxwell's voice remained level, emotionless. Blake Sullivan, the hedge fund manager from her social circle. Jesus, Max. What are you going to do? Nothing yet. Maxwell retrieved his phone. I'm still gathering information. That's your response? Gathering information? We're talking about your wife cheating. Maxwell's expression hardened slightly. Emotional reactions create mistakes. I don't make mistakes. Later that evening, Maxwell entered their silent home well past midnight, having deliberately stayed late at the office. A wine glass sat abandoned on the kitchen counter, lipstick staining its rim. Vanessa's purse was on the entryway table. She was home, likely asleep. He moved silently through the house to his home office, unlocking the bottom drawer of his desk, where he kept a secondary phone. Activating it, he reviewed the tracking data from the discrete device he'd placed in Vanessa's car 2 weeks earlier. The GPS log showed her at Blake Sullivan's Lake Forest address for nearly 4 hours that evening. Maxwell felt no surge of betrayal or jealousy, only a cold, calculating certainty solidifying into purpose. He'd suspected for months, confirmed it 3 weeks ago, and now had established a pattern. Sufficient evidence to proceed. The following morning brought a rare occurrence. Breakfast with Vanessa, who normally departed early for her interior design consultations. You were home late, she remarked, not looking up from her phone. End of quarter reports. Maxwell replied, watching her closely. Blake Sullivan called yesterday. He's organizing a dinner party next weekend at Rossetti's. Private room. Very exclusive. She finally met his eyes. I told him we'd come. Blake Sullivan. Maxwell repeated neutrally. You've mentioned him before. He's on several boards with me now. His firm manages investments for half our friends. Vanessa's tone carried a subtle challenge. You should network with him. Maybe he could help your career. Maxwell took a measured sip of coffee. That's thoughtful of you. I'm serious, Maxwell. Don't you ever think about advancement? Partners at your firm make 3 times what you do. I'm comfortable with where I am. Vanessa set down her phone with uncharacteristic force. Well, I'm not. Do you know how it feels when everyone asks what my husband does, and all I can say is that you're the same mid-level advisor you were when we met? While their husbands are making partner, starting firms, buying vacation homes. We have a vacation home, Maxwell noted calmly. That tiny lakeside cottage? I'm talking about real homes, Maxwell. Places people want to visit. The cottage she dismissed had cost $1.2 million in cash, a fact she didn't know, as Maxwell had told her they'd mortgaged it. Blake offered to look at our portfolio. By the way, Vanessa continued. He thinks he could double our returns. Did he? Maxwell felt the first flicker of genuine amusement. That's very generous. See? This is why you're stuck. You won't accept help or take chances. She stood, collecting her barely touched breakfast. The dinner is Saturday. Wear your blue suit. It's the only one that looks remotely current. After she left, Maxwell remained at the table, considering her outburst. For 14 years, he'd maintained his facade, partly for security, partly from habit. Now, he questioned whether it had been worth it. His phone buzzed with a text from Leo. Conference call with Rossetti's management in 30 minutes. New chef causing issues. Maxwell texted back, joining shortly. Also, need reservation Saturday night. Main dining room, not private. For you and Vanessa? I'll handle it personally. Maxwell pocketed his phone, decision made. Saturday would mark the beginning of the end, not just of his marriage, but the careful separation he'd maintained between his public persona and his true power. It was time for the silent partner to make some noise. Chapter 3. The Restaurant Revelation. Saturday evening arrived with a crystalline clarity that only comes from absolute certainty. Maxwell adjusted his tie. Not from the blue suit Vanessa had suggested, but a custom-tailored charcoal brioni he kept for significant business meetings. Tonight qualified. You're not wearing the blue, Vanessa observed sharply as they prepared to leave. It needed alterations, Maxwell replied. He'd actually donated the suit that morning, along with half his wardrobe. He wouldn't be needing the carefully cultivated image of mediocrity anymore. They drove separately to Rossetti's, Vanessa claiming she might stay late with friends, Maxwell knowing she planned to rendezvous with Blake afterward. The arrangement suited him perfectly. Rossetti's occupied a restored historic building in Chicago's West Loop, its limestone facade illuminated by discreet lighting that highlighted its architectural details without ostentation. A red carpet extended from the entrance, where a line of hopeful diners without reservations waited for any possibility of a table. The maitre d' brightened immediately upon Maxwell's arrival. Mr. Reed, an unexpected pleasure to have you dining with us tonight. Maxwell noticed Vanessa's confused glance. Thank you, Anthony. Is everything prepared? Of course, sir. Though I understood you'd be joining the Sullivan party in the private dining room. Change of plans. We'll dine in the main room tonight. Anthony nodded knowingly. Your usual table is ready, sir. As they followed Anthony through the restaurant, Maxwell observed Vanessa's growing bewilderment. The staff's deferential treatment continued. The sommelier approached unbidden with Maxwell's preferred wine. The executive chef emerged briefly to greet him with familiar respect. What is happening? Vanessa whispered as they were seated at the best table in the house, overlooking both the dining room and the open kitchen. How do they know you? I come here occasionally for business lunches, Maxwell replied smoothly. Before she could question further, Blake Sullivan appeared at their table, his practiced smile faltering slightly at finding them in the main dining room. Vanessa, Maxwell, we're all set up in the Medici room. His hand rested possessively on Vanessa's shoulder. Everyone's waiting. Maxwell noted the casual touch, the territorial display. Actually, Blake will be dining here tonight. Feel free to join us. Blake's confidence wavered momentarily before reasserting itself. Come on, man. I arranged this weeks ago. Private room, special menu, the works. It's impossible to get. And yet, here we are. Maxwell gestured to their table. Look, Blake lowered his voice. I don't know what your issue is, but this is embarrassing. The executive chef himself is preparing our meal in the private room. No, he isn't, Maxwell replied calmly. Blake's expression hardened. I specifically arranged. The executive chef does not cater private parties, not even for board members. That would be his sous chef, who is excellent, but not Chef Moretti. Vanessa's embarrassment transformed to anger. Maxwell, stop being difficult. Let's join Blake's party. You're welcome to join them, Vanessa. I'm staying here. Blake straightened, smoothing his tailored jacket. Fine. Stay here, Maxwell. Vanessa, shall we? Everyone's asking for you. Maxwell watched his wife's decision play across her face. Momentary hesitation followed by resolution as she stood to leave with Blake. He'd anticipated this choice. Just one moment, Maxwell said quietly. Blake turned impatiently. What now? I'd like to introduce my wife to some friends first. That table by the window. Maxwell nodded toward a group of 4 distinguished-looking diners. The gentleman in the navy suit is Howard Kessler, managing partner at Vanguard Capital. Beside him is Patricia Westbrook, chief investment strategist for Northern Trust. Vanessa's expression shifted from irritation to confusion. Why would they want to meet me? Because they've heard so much about you from our mutual friend Dominic Russell. And because they're considering investing in your interior design firm's expansion. This was news to Vanessa and deliberately misleading. Maxwell had indeed discussed her work with these associates, but primarily to ensure she would have sustainable income after their divorce. My expansion? I don't have expansion plans, she faltered. Perhaps you should develop some, Maxwell suggested. They're expecting us. Just a quick introduction before you join Blake. Caught off guard, Vanessa followed Maxwell to the table of financial elites, where he was greeted with genuine warmth and respect. Maxwell twice in 1 week. The world must be ending, Howard Kessler joked, standing to shake his hand. Howard, Patricia, Ben, Marlene, my wife, Vanessa Reed. The introductions proceeded smoothly, with Maxwell seamlessly discussing investment strategies and market projections that left Vanessa staring at him in mounting disbelief. Maxwell advised us against that pharmaceutical merger last quarter, Patricia said to Vanessa. Save us $20 million when it collapsed. Your husband sees the round corners. We've been trying to get him to join our board for years, Howard added. But he's too busy building his own empire to help steer ours. Vanessa's composure began to crack. I think there's been some confusion. Maxwell is an investment advisor at Pinnacle Financial. The table fell momentarily silent before Ben chuckled. That's just his day job. Surely you know about Reed Holdings, the restaurant group, the tech investments. Maxwell watched realization dawn across Vanessa's face. We should let you return to your dinner, he said smoothly. Vanessa has another engagement tonight. As they walked away, Vanessa gripped his arm painfully. What the hell is going on, Maxwell? You should join Blake. He's waiting, and you wouldn't want to keep him and your friends waiting. Not until you explain what that was about. Maxwell gently removed her hand from his arm. Go to your dinner, Vanessa. We'll discuss this at home. Her eyes narrowed. Fine, but this isn't over. Maxwell watched her storm toward the private dining room, then returned to his table. He had ordered and finished his appetizer when the commotion began. First came the raised voices from the private dining room, followed by Blake emerging with Vanessa and 6 others. Their wealthy friends, including the Whitcombs, the Prestons, and the newly divorced Trish Hathaway. This is ridiculous, Blake was saying loudly to the apologetic maitre d'. We're in the middle of dinner. That's when Maxwell noticed Leo Conway standing beside the restaurant manager, both looking grim. Right on schedule. Vanessa spotted Maxwell and marched toward him. Did you do this? They're kicking us out. I did nothing, Maxwell replied truthfully. He had merely set events in motion, knowing Blake's overinflated ego would inevitably cause a scene when challenged. The restaurant manager approached their table, Blake and the others trailing behind. Mr. Reed, I apologize for the disturbance. We've had an unfortunate situation arise. What's happening, Paul? Maxwell asked calmly. Mr. Sullivan became inappropriate with one of our staff members. The manager's professional demeanor remained intact, but his eyes conveyed the severity. Blake's face flushed red. That waitress was flirting with me all night. She practically invited. That waitress is my niece and a college student, Paul cut in coldly. And the owner has asked that your party leave immediately. The owner? Blake scoffed. Get him out here. Do you know who I am? I'm on a board of. I know exactly who you are, Blake. Maxwell interrupted, standing slowly. Paul, it's fine. Mr. Sullivan was just leaving. The restaurant fell silent as connections were rapidly made. Blake stared at Maxwell, comprehension dawning. You're not the owner? Among other things. Maxwell straightened his cuffs. Rossetti was my grandmother's maiden name. Vanessa's expression transformed from anger to shock. You own this restaurant? This one and 10 others. Maxwell nodded to Paul. Mr. Sullivan and his guests were just leaving. Their dinner is complimentary, of course. He can barely afford dinner. Vanessa blurted out, the weeks of dismissive comments culminating in this final, public humiliation. She turned to her friends with a desperate, nervous laugh. He makes $80,000 a year. He's been passed over for promotion 3 times. The silence that followed was deafening. Maxwell simply waited, letting the moment stretch uncomfortably. I excused myself, he finally said quietly. Minutes later, the restaurant manager approached their table. The owner has asked you to leave, he said politely, gesturing towards me. Her jaw hit the floor. Maxwell smiled thinly at the assembled group. And now, if you'll excuse me, I have a dinner to finish and a divorce to initiate. As security arrived to escort the stunned party out, Maxwell noted with satisfaction the calculating looks on the faces of Vanessa's friends. By morning, everyone in their social circle would know of his wealth and her betrayal. Phase 1 of his plan was complete. Chapter 4, The Unraveling. The day after the restaurant incident, Maxwell moved methodically through his home, collecting essential documents and sentimental items, his father's pocket watch, his grandfather's worn Bible, photos from his childhood. He worked silently, efficiently, a man accustomed to executing well-laid plans. Vanessa had not returned home last night. Her phone calls and messages, first angry, then bewildered, finally pleading, remained unanswered as Maxwell prepared for the next phase. The doorbell rang at precisely 9 a.m. Maxwell opened it to find Leo and Naomi Parker, his longtime attorney. Everything ready? Naomi asked, her expression professional but concerned. Maxwell nodded, leading them to his home office. The movers arrive at noon for my personal items. I've marked everything. Vanessa called me 6 times last night, Leo said. Should I have warned you about her indiscretion sooner? You confirmed what I already suspected. The timing was perfect. Maxwell unlocked his safe, removing several hard drives and document portfolios. These need to go to the secure room at the Highland office. Max, Naomi began carefully. I prepared the divorce filing as requested, but are you certain about these terms? You're offering her significantly more than required. I want this clean and quick. The house, the vacation property, $2 million in cash, and a monthly stipend for 5 years. Enough for her to maintain appearances while she builds her business. She cheated on you, Leo pointed out. Humiliated you publicly. Maxwell placed the documents in his briefcase. This isn't about emotion. It's about efficiency. The settlement eliminates her incentive to fight, to dig deeper into my holdings. And Blake Sullivan? Leo pressed. What about him? A cold smile touched Maxwell's lips. Blake's demise requires no intervention from me. His hedge fund is already faltering, leveraged beyond sustainability. I've simply accelerated certain market forces. The Wellington Group acquisition, Naomi realized. You're forcing the disclosure of his fund's position. Among other things, Blake built his reputation on insider connections and market manipulation. I'm ensuring the SEC receives comprehensive documentation of his activities. Leo shook his head in amazement. You've been planning this for months. Since the charity gala, Maxwell confirmed, when I first noticed his interest in Vanessa, though the specific strategy evolved as I gathered information. A text alert sounded on Maxwell's phone. He checked it, then stood. Vanessa just turned onto our street. Naomi, wait for us in the study. Leo with me. They positioned themselves in the living room moments before Vanessa burst through the front door, still wearing last night's evening dress, her makeup smudged from crying. "How dare you ignore my calls?" she began, then stopped short upon seeing Leo. "What's he doing here?" "Supporting a friend," Leo replied coldly. Vanessa's eyes darted between them. "Maxwell, we need to talk privately." "Leo stays," Maxwell stated flatly. "Anything you have to say can be said in front of him." "Fine." She dropped her clutch purse on the console table. "You've been lying to me for our entire marriage." "Interesting perspective," Maxwell replied. "I never lied about my income or assets. You assumed, and I allowed the assumption." "Allowed?" "You deliberately misled me. All these years, letting me believe we were just getting by when you own, what? Restaurants? Real estate? What else haven't you told me?" "That's no longer your concern." Maxwell remained impassive. "Naomi Parker is waiting in the study with divorce papers. I'm prepared to be generous, Vanessa. The house, the lake property, financial support while you establish your business independently." Her expression shifted instantly from accusation to calculation. "Divorce?" "Maxwell, don't be absurd. Whatever you think happened with Blake." "I know exactly what happened with Blake." Maxwell cut her off. "The affair began 4 months ago, shortly after the charity gala. You meet primarily at his Lake Forest house on Tuesdays and Thursdays, though there have been 3 hotel encounters as well." Vanessa's face drained of color. "You had me follow?" "Unnecessary. Your location tracking was enabled on our shared cloud account." A bitter laugh escaped her. "So what now? You punish me by revealing you're actually rich? That's your revenge." "This isn't revenge, Vanessa. It's dissolution. Our marriage has been deteriorating for years. The affair simply accelerated the timeline. You can't just throw away 14 years. We can work through this. Couples therapy, a fresh start." Her voice softened strategically. "Now that I know who you really are, things will be different." Maxwell studied her, noting the familiar manipulation techniques. "That's precisely the problem. You never knew who I was because you never bothered to look beyond the surface. You saw what you expected to see until it no longer satisfied you." Vanessa's facade cracked. "You were never there. Always working, always distant. What was I supposed to think?" "You were supposed to trust your husband," Leo interjected. "Talk to him before jumping into bed with someone else. Stay out of this." Vanessa snapped, turning back to Maxwell. "If you're so wealthy, why hide it? Why live like this when we could have had so much more?" "Because I value security over display," Maxwell answered simply. "My father lost everything pursuing the appearance of success. I built something lasting by focusing on substance. Well, your substance made me a laughingstock." Tears welled in her eyes. "Everyone thought I married a nobody. And that bothered you enough to betray our vows." Maxwell's voice remained even, "Which tells me everything I need to know about your character." The finality in his tone penetrated her defenses. Vanessa stared at him, truly seeing the steel beneath his quiet exterior for perhaps the first time. "The divorce papers," Maxwell continued, "include a confidentiality agreement. You'll tell no one about my business holdings beyond what became public last night. In exchange, your infidelity remains private. And if I refuse, then you'll receive only what Illinois law mandates for an at-fault divorce. Likely nothing, given the evidence I've compiled and the prenuptial agreement you signed." Vanessa's expression hardened. "So I get hush money and a house while you continue your secret empire? That's your idea of fair?" "Fair would be leaving you with nothing," Leo muttered. Maxwell silenced him with a glance. "This isn't negotiable, Vanessa. Sign today, and you maintain your lifestyle and dignity. Fight me, and you lose both." The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loudly as Vanessa weighed her options. Finally, her shoulders slumped in resignation. "Fine. Where do I sign?" "Naomi will walk you through everything. Then I suggest you call Blake. He's going to need emotional support in the coming weeks." "Why? What have you done?" Maxwell checked his watch. "Nothing yet. But by market close today, the SEC will be reviewing some very interesting documentation regarding his fund's activities." "You're destroying him because of me?" Horror dawned on her face. "No, Vanessa. Blake Sullivan is destroying himself through his own arrogance and fraud. I'm simply declining to protect him from the consequences of his actions." Maxwell nodded toward the study. Naomi is waiting. As Vanessa walked numbly toward the study, Leo whistled low. Cold, Max, effective but cold. This is just the beginning, Maxwell replied, checking his phone as another alert came through. Blake's attempting to liquidate positions ahead of the Wellington announcement. Exactly as predicted. You've thought of everything, Leo observed. No, Maxwell corrected him. I've simply recognized patterns and prepared accordingly. People like Blake and Vanessa are predictable in their self-interest. They seek shortcuts to status and wealth, which inevitably creates vulnerabilities. And you've never wanted status? Maxwell considered the question. Status is useful when strategically deployed. But no, I've never craved recognition for its own sake. He glanced toward the study where Vanessa was signing away their marriage. That's why she never truly knew me. She couldn't comprehend someone valuing power without its display. 3 hours later, Maxwell stood in the empty master bedroom. The movers had taken his carefully labeled possessions, leaving Vanessa's untouched. The divorce papers were signed, notarized, and filed electronically. His methodical dismantling of their shared life was nearly complete. His phone rang. Howard Kessler from Vanguard Capital. Maxwell, just heard about Sullivan's fund imploding. SEC's got auditors crawling through his books as we speak. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that anonymous tip with all that documentation, would you? Market forces demand transparency. Howard. A knowing chuckle came through the line. Of course. Listen, word's spreading about your restaurant group and other holdings. The board position we discussed is officially yours if you want it. I appreciate that. Let's discuss next week. Maxwell ended the call, gazing around the bedroom one final time. The demolition phase was proceeding perfectly. Now it was time to rebuild, on his terms, in plain sight. Chapter 5. The House of Cards. The Wellington Group announcement hit financial news outlets at precisely 9:30 a.m. on Monday, sending shockwaves through specific sectors of the market. Maxwell watched from his new penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan as Bloomberg reported the development with urgency. In a stunning move, Wellington Group has announced its acquisition of Meridian Technologies, revealing significant undisclosed liabilities that have sent Meridian's stock plummeting 72% in pre-market trading. Several hedge funds with major positions in Meridian are facing catastrophic losses, most notably Sullivan Capital Management. Maxwell sipped his coffee, satisfaction warming him more than the beverage. Blake Sullivan had built his fund on 3 pillars: insider connections, media manipulation, and concentrated positions in technology stocks, particularly Meridian, where Blake's college roommate served as CFO. What Blake hadn't known was that Maxwell owned 8% of Wellington Group through various shell companies, giving him advanced knowledge of the acquisition plans and the troubling findings during due diligence. Maxwell hadn't acted on this information directly. That would be illegal insider trading. Instead, he had simply ensured Wellington's board understood the importance of complete transparency regarding Meridian's financial irregularities upon announcement. His phone rang, Leo, calling from the Highland office. You seeing this? Sullivan's fund is finished. They're halting redemptions while the SEC investigation proceeds. Expected outcome, Maxwell replied calmly. How's the restaurant group transition? Smooth so far. The management team is relieved you're taking a more public role. Reservation requests have doubled since word spread about your ownership. Increase staffing accordingly. I want quality maintained. Maxwell moved to his laptop, reviewing preliminary designs for Reed Tower, his newly announced downtown development project. Any word for Vanessa? Her attorney requested clarification on the confidentiality provisions this morning. Apparently, she's already struggling with keeping quiet about your assets. She'll comply. The alternative is financial suicide. Maxwell zoomed in on an architectural detail, making a note for the project manager. And Blake. Leo's tone darkened. Made bail this morning. The securities fraud charges are just the beginning. They're finding irregularities going back years. Word is he's trying to reach you. I'm not available to him. He showed up at the Highland office. Security turned him away, but he seemed desperate. Maxwell considered this development. Increase security at all properties. If he approaches me directly, I'll handle it. After ending the call, Maxwell reviewed his calendar. The day included meetings with his expanded executive team, an interview with the Chicago Business Journal, and dinner with Dominic Russell and his wife. The first social engagement since his public emergence. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. You've destroyed everything. At least give me that." "Blake." Maxwell deleted the message without responding. Blake Sullivan was no longer relevant to his plans. Later that afternoon, Maxwell sat across from Catherine Zhang, the Chicago Business Journal's most respected financial reporter. She'd been pursuing an interview for weeks, ever since his ownership of Rossetti's became public knowledge. "Mr. Reed, your emergence as a major player in Chicago business has taken everyone by surprise," she began. "Some are calling you the ghost because of how invisibly you built your empire. Was that deliberate?" "I prefer strategic privacy," Maxwell replied. "Building quietly allowed me to focus on fundamentals rather than perception. Yet your companies have outperformed market averages by significant margins. The Reed portfolio's restaurants show 40% higher profitability than industry standards. Your real estate developments have revitalized struggling neighborhoods without displacing residents. There seems to be a philosophy beyond just wealth accumulation." Maxwell appreciated her preparation. "My father lost our family home during the steel industry collapse. I watched financial institutions profit from that devastation while communities suffered. My approach attempts to align financial success with community stability. Yet you've remained personally unknown until recently. What changed?" A calculated pause. "Let's just say certain personal developments necessitated a more public profile." Catherine's eyes sharpened with interest. "You're referring to your divorce? That's a private matter." "Of course." She shifted tactics. "Your ex-wife's interior design firm has just announced a partnership with Whitcomb Developments, owned by close friends of Blake Sullivan, who's currently facing securities fraud charges." "Any connection?" Maxwell maintained his neutral expression. "None whatsoever. My ex-wife's business activities are her own concern." Catherine clearly didn't believe him, but moved on. "Let's discuss Reed Tower. At 68 stories, it will be your most ambitious project yet." The interview continued professionally, with Maxwell revealing selective details about his business philosophy and future plans. When it concluded, Catherine lingered during the photographer's setup for accompanying portraits. "Off the record, Mr. Reed, there are rumors that Blake Sullivan's downfall wasn't entirely coincidental to your divorce." Maxwell met her gaze steadily. "The market rewards integrity and punishes its absence, Ms. Zhang. That's not coincidence, it's causality. And your ex-wife's involvement with Sullivan is irrelevant to his legal troubles. His fraud predates any personal connections." Catherine studied him with newfound respect. "You're either the most calculating man I've ever met or the most principled. I haven't decided which. Perhaps principles require calculation to survive in today's world," Maxwell suggested as the photographer called him to position. That evening, Maxwell welcomed Dominic Russell and his wife Elaine to his penthouse for dinner. The neurosurgeon had been the first to recognize Maxwell's deliberate obscurity at the charity gala months ago, and Maxwell had identified him as a potential ally in his reconstructed social circle. "Spectacular view," Dominic commented, accepting a glass of whiskey as they stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Though I must say, I preferred the mystery of not knowing whether you were the Maxwell Reed behind the Highland acquisition." Maxwell allowed a rare, genuine smile. The mystery served its purpose, which was freedom to operate without expectations or interference. Elaine joined them, champagne in hand. "Dom tells me you're reshaping your public image completely. New development, philanthropy announcements, board positions. Quite the transformation." "Evolution rather than transformation," Maxwell corrected. "The foundations were always there, just not visible." "Speaking of visible," Dominic said carefully, "I saw Vanessa at the Palmer House yesterday. With Blake Sullivan." Maxwell showed no reaction. "Unsurprising, even with his legal troubles?" Elaine asked incredulously. "Birds of a feather," Dominic muttered. "Blake's legal situation will resolve as justice dictates. Maxwell said neutrally. My interest in both him and Vanessa ended with a divorce. The elegant dinner proceeded pleasantly, focusing on mutual interests in urban development and healthcare innovation. As they were saying goodbye, Dominic took Maxwell aside. Fair warning. Vanessa's been telling people you're vindicatively destroying Blake to punish her. Says you're obsessed and dangerous. Predictable narrative, Maxwell replied, unconcerned. The facts will speak for themselves. After his guest departed, Maxwell received an alert from his building security. Blake Sullivan was in the lobby, intoxicated and demanding to see him. Shall we remove him, Mr. Reed? The security chief asked over the intercom. Maxwell considered his options. Confronting Blake now might actually accelerate his plans. Send him up, but have security remain in the hallway. Minutes later, a disheveled Blake Sullivan stood swaying slightly in Maxwell's penthouse entryway. His designer suit was rumpled, his eyes bloodshot. Nice place, Blake slurred, looking around bitterly. All this while pretending to be nobody. You must have enjoyed watching us all underestimate you. State your purpose, Blake. It's late. My purpose? Blake laughed harshly. My purpose is gone. Funds frozen, clients fleeing, SEC freezing my assets. All because you couldn't handle your wife wanting a real man. Maxwell regarded him with cold assessment. Your fund collapsed because you committed securities fraud, Blake. Your relationship with my ex-wife is irrelevant to those facts. Bullshit. The timing's too perfect. You orchestrated everything. The Wellington deal, the SEC investigation, all of it. You give me too much credit. Blake's desperation turned to rage. You arrogant bastard. You think you've won? Vanessa never loved you. She told me everything. How you were emotionally absent, sexually inadequate. She was using you for years. Maxwell's expression remained unchanged. Are you finished? No. You destroyed my life over a woman who was throwing herself at me. She's still with me, you know. We're planning to leave the country once I handle these trumped-up charges. Planning to flee prosecution is a federal offense, Blake. You might want to reconsider announcing that intention. Blake lunged forward suddenly, grabbing Maxwell's shirt. You think this is a game? I've lost everything. With surprising speed, Maxwell twisted, using Blake's momentum against him. In one fluid motion, Blake found himself face down on the marble floor, Maxwell's knee pressing precisely between his shoulder blades. Listen carefully, Maxwell said quietly, increasing pressure as Blake struggled. You lost everything through your own greed and fraud. I simply declined to protect you from the consequences. He leaned closer. And Blake? If you ever approach me again, what's happening to you now will seem like a minor inconvenience compared to what follows. Maxwell released him and stepped back. Security will escort you out. I suggest you focus on your legal defense rather than your relationship with Vanessa. She has a pattern of abandoning sinking ships. As security led the humiliated Blake away, Maxwell straightened his shirt cuffs, noting with satisfaction that the confrontation had unfolded almost exactly as he'd anticipated. Blake's desperation, Vanessa's betrayal, their plans to flee, all information he could use. The house of cards was collapsing precisely as designed. But Maxwell wasn't finished yet. The final phase of his plan required one more calculated move, time for maximum effect. Chapter 6, The Invisible Hand. 3 weeks after his confrontation with Blake, Maxwell sat in Naomi Parker's office reviewing documents for his newest acquisition, a struggling media company that owned several influential local publications, including the Society magazine that had been Vanessa's Bible for years. The bankruptcy court approved our bid, Naomi confirmed. Ownership transfers next Tuesday. We've kept your involvement completely confidential, as requested. Excellent. And the editorial transition. The new editor-in-chief starts immediately. Catherine Zhang from the Business Journal. She's eager to implement the editorial vision you discussed, particularly the feature on financial fraud among Chicago's elite. Maxwell nodded with satisfaction. Perfect timing. Speaking of timing, Naomi hesitated. The FBI has requested an interview with you regarding Blake Sullivan's case. Apparently, he's been making accusations. Expected. Schedule it at their convenience. I have nothing to hide. That's just it. Max Blake's claiming you engineered his downfall, using insider information about the Wellington Meridian deal. A desperate defense strategy. The SEC has already reviewed my trading records and found nothing irregular. Maxwell adjusted his tie. Blake is attempting to create a persecution narrative to distract from his own malfeasance. Naomi studied him. You really did think of everything, didn't you? No direct trades, no paper trail connecting you to Wellington's decision timing. I simply ensured that truth had a clear path to discovery. What Blake calls persecution, the law calls transparency. As Maxwell left the law office, his phone buzzed with a text from Leo. V spotted at Chicago First National. Banking records show large withdrawal attempt. Bank froze accounts per divorce agreement. Maxwell frowned slightly. Vanessa attempting to access extraordinary funds suggested she and Blake might be accelerating whatever escape plan they concocted. A complication, but not an insurmountable one. He texted back, monitor closely. Alert me to any travel arrangements. That afternoon, Maxwell met with the FBI agents as arranged. The interview took place in a conference room at the Highland office building, with Naomi present as his counsel. Mr. Reed, Agent Diaz began, we're investigating allegations made by Blake Sullivan regarding your possible involvement in the market events surrounding Meridian Technologies. I'm happy to assist, Maxwell replied calmly. Mr. Sullivan claims you orchestrated the Wellington acquisition timing to deliberately destroy his fund, using insider information. Mr. Sullivan is facing criminal charges and seeking scapegoats, Maxwell observed. What specific questions do you have for me? For the next hour, Maxwell answered their questions with precise, factual responses. Yes, he owned shares in Wellington Group through various investment vehicles. No, he had no direct role in acquisition timing decisions. Yes, he was aware his ex-wife had developed a relationship with Sullivan during their marriage. No, that had no bearing on his business activities. One final question, Mr. Reed, Agent Prescott said. Did you at any point provide information to the SEC regarding Sullivan Capital Management's trading activities? I believe in market transparency, Agent Prescott. When I became aware of potentially irregular trading patterns through publicly available information, I compiled that analysis and submitted it through proper channels. As any concerned market participant should. The agents exchanged glances. That's not in Sullivan's allegations. Because he's unaware of it, Maxwell replied. The SEC keeps whistleblower identities confidential. After the agents departed, Naomi shook her head in amazement. You just admitted to triggering the investigation that destroyed him. I admitted to fulfilling my civic duty by reporting suspected securities violations through proper channels. Nothing more. You're either the most ethical, ruthless man I've ever met, or the most ruthlessly ethical. Maxwell smiled thinly. Is there a difference? Later that evening, Maxwell received an unexpected visitor at his penthouse, Dominic Russell, arriving without his wife and looking troubled. Sorry for the unannounced visit, Dominic said as Maxwell welcomed him in. Something's happened that you should know about. Please sit. Maxwell poured 2 whiskeys, handing one to his friend. Elaine hosted a charity committee meeting today. Vanessa attended. Dominic took a substantial sip before continuing. She was unhinged, Maxwell, telling everyone you're manipulating the legal system to persecute Blake, that you've frozen her assets illegally, that you're threatening them. All false, of course. Obviously. But she's convincing to those who don't know better. She had several of the women in tears with stories about your supposed controlling behavior during your marriage. Maxwell considered this information. And how did Elaine respond? Called her out completely. Reminded everyone that Blake's facing federal charges based on documented fraud, not your influence. Then suggested Vanessa might want to reconsider her loyalty to a man who victimized his own investors. I appreciate Elaine's support. Dominic leaned forward. There's more. After most guests left, Vanessa received a phone call that upset her severely. She mentioned something about offshore accounts being frozen and Blake being denied bail modification. Then she asked Elaine if she could recommend a criminal defense attorney. This was significant news. Blake must have attempted to access emergency funds only to discover Maxwell had already identified and reported his hidden accounts to federal authorities. "Thank you for telling me this," Maxwell said. "It may be relevant to an ongoing federal investigation." "You knew, didn't you? About their offshore accounts?" Maxwell sipped his whiskey. "Let's just say I've learned to anticipate certain behaviors from people with particular character profiles. They're planning to run, aren't they?" "We're planning," Maxwell corrected. "Those options are now closed." Dominic studied him with newfound respect and wariness. "You're a dangerous man to cross," Maxwell read. "I prefer thorough." After Dominic left, Maxwell made a call to Agent Diaz, sharing the information about Vanessa's comments regarding offshore accounts. The agent thanked him, noting they'd be following up immediately. The next morning brought news that Blake Sullivan had been arrested again, this time for attempting to access hidden assets in violation of court orders. His bail was revoked. Vanessa was brought in for questioning regarding her knowledge of these accounts. Maxwell watched the developments with clinical detachment. His invisible hand had guided events, but Blake and Vanessa had made their own choices at every turn. He had merely ensured those choices had consequences. Later that day, the first edition of Chicago Society under its new ownership hit newsstands. The cover story, "Financial Predators: How Fraud Artists Target Chicago's Elite," featured Blake Sullivan prominently, with extensive details of his scheme and victims. An accompanying sidebar noted Vanessa Reed's interior design firm had received substantial payments from Sullivan's fund for consulting services that appear to have no legitimate business purpose. Maxwell's phone rang incessantly as former social connections sought his comment on the explosive article. He declined all calls except one. Catherine Zhang, the new editor-in-chief. "Quite an impactful first issue," he noted when he answered. "The facts spoke for themselves," she replied. "Though I'm curious, did you know what we'd find when you suggested investigating Sullivan's client relationships?" "I had suspicions. Your team did the actual journalism, including discovering your ex-wife received over $300,000 for design services that no one can verify. An unfortunate coincidence," Maxwell said neutrally. Catherine's skeptical silence spoke volumes. Finally, she said, "The FBI interviewed her this morning about those payments. Sources tell me she implicated Sullivan completely, claiming she was manipulated." "Unsurprising. You know," Catherine observed, "for someone whose ex-wife is potentially facing criminal charges, you seem remarkably unaffected." "My concern is for justice, not vengeance, Ms. Zhang." "Of course." Her tone suggested complete disbelief. "One more thing. We're planning a profile on you for next month's issue. The invisible hand behind Chicago's Renaissance. Would you be willing to be interviewed?" "I'll consider it," Maxwell replied, ending the call. By nightfall, Maxwell had received confirmation that Vanessa had been released after her FBI interview, but with travel restrictions pending further investigation. Blake remained in custody, his legal problems mounting as investigators discovered additional irregularities in his fund's operations. Standing at his penthouse window overlooking the city, Maxwell allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Phase 2 of his plan, the complete dismantling of Blake's business and reputation, had been accomplished without Maxwell ever directly attacking him. The man had been destroyed by his own actions, with Maxwell merely ensuring those actions received proper scrutiny. Phase 3 was about to begin. The reconstruction of Maxwell's public identity, fully in control of his own narrative for the first time. The restaurant incident had been merely the opening move in a much larger game, one where Maxwell had rewritten the rules entirely. His phone rang again. "Leo." "It's done," his friend reported. "Blake Sullivan has agreed to a plea deal. 5 to 7 years, full cooperation against other conspirators." "And Vanessa?" "Being investigated for potential money laundering through her design firm. Her assets have been frozen pending the outcome." Maxwell nodded to himself. Perfect timing for the Reed Foundation announcement tomorrow. "The contrast won't be lost on anyone," Leo agreed. "While they face disgrace and criminal charges, You'll be launching a $50 million initiative to revitalize struggling neighborhoods. The same ones where Sullivan's fund redline borrowers. Poetic justice, Maxwell murmured. More like calculated justice, Leo corrected. You've choreographed every move since the night at Rossetti's. The question is, are you satisfied now? Maxwell considered the question seriously. Not satisfaction, Leo. Completion. I've simply restored proper balance. And what does that mean for Vanessa? Maxwell's expression hardened slightly. She made her choices. Now she'll live with the consequences. You know, she'll lose everything. Her reputation, her business, possibly her freedom. Yes, Maxwell acknowledged coldly. Just as she was willing to let me lose everything that mattered to me. My dignity, my privacy, my carefully constructed life. The ruthlessness in his voice surprised even Leo. I'm starting to think Blake Sullivan got off easy compared to what you had planned for Vanessa. Maxwell turned from the window. The invisible hand doesn't punish Leo. It simply ensures that actions find their natural consequences. Blake committed financial crimes and will face justice for them. Vanessa committed betrayal and will discover that her carefully cultivated social standing was built on sand. As he ended the call, Maxwell reviewed the next day's schedule, the foundation announcement, meetings with community leaders, and a private dinner with potential business partners. His new life was taking shape exactly as planned. The restaurant revelation had been just the beginning. His true revenge would be living well, publicly and powerfully, while those who had dismissed him faced the consequences of their own character flaws. Not through his direct action, but through his meticulous arrangement of circumstances where truth inevitably emerged. That was the art of the invisible hand, guiding events while leaving no fingerprints. Chapter 7. The Phoenix Strategy. 6 months after the restaurant revelation, Maxwell Reed had transformed from Chicago's hidden power broker to its most visible business leader. Reed Tower was rising rapidly downtown. The Reed Foundation's community initiatives were earning national attention, and his expanded restaurant group had become the city's culinary gold standard. Today marked another milestone, the grand opening of Reed Innovation Center, a technology incubator focused on supporting entrepreneurs from underserved communities. Maxwell stood at the podium, addressing the gathered crowd of business leaders, community representatives, and media. Success should create opportunities, not just accumulate wealth, he concluded his remarks. This center will ensure that innovation isn't limited by zip code or background, but fueled by determination and vision. The applause was genuinely enthusiastic. Maxwell had carefully cultivated his public image as a business leader with conscience, the antithesis of predatory figures like Blake Sullivan, whose sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following week. As Maxwell mingled with guests afterward, Catherine Zhang approached with recorder in hand. Impressive facility, she noted, especially the decision to name the main fellowship after your father. He believed in building lasting value. Maxwell replied, this honors his philosophy. Speaking of lasting value, Catherine segued smoothly. I'm following up on the Sullivan case. Sources tell me he's providing evidence against several other fund managers in exchange for sentencing considerations. Justice takes many forms. Indeed. And what about your ex-wife? Any comment on her plea agreement? Vanessa had ultimately accepted a deal, probation, and significant financial penalties in exchange for testimony against Blake and other conspirators. Her design business had collapsed, her social standing evaporated, and her assets seized to satisfy restitution requirements. My ex-wife's legal situation is her own concern, Maxwell replied neutrally. I wish her well in rebuilding her life. Catherine clearly didn't believe his diplomatic response, but moved to another topic. The rumor mill says you've purchased the Adler building, the same property where your father once worked before the steel collapse. Sentiment or strategy? Maxwell allowed a small smile. Both. That building represents where I came from and where I'm going. We'll be announcing its redevelopment next month, maintaining the historic facade while creating sustainable internal spaces. After Catherine departed, Maxwell checked his watch. He had one more important meeting today, one not on his official calendar. 90 minutes later, Maxwell sat in a private room at Gibson Steakhouse across from Howard Kessler and Patricia Westbrook from Vanguard Capital. The Sullivan Capital Assets acquisition is proceeding smoothly, Howard reported. Once the court approves our bid, we'll control their entire portfolio at approximately 30 cents on the dollar. With your capital contribution, we'll be positioned to stabilize those investments and eventually restore significant value, Patricia added. The former clients who stayed with the receiver will be made whole. Maxwell nodded approvingly. And the management structure we discussed? In place, Howard confirmed. The new entity will operate independently, but with oversight from the Reed Group. Your role remains officially advisory, maintaining appropriate distance given the circumstances. Perfect. This arrangement represented the culmination of Maxwell's Phoenix strategy, rising from the ashes of Blake Sullivan's collapsed fund to rescue its legitimate assets while maintaining ethical separation. The former clients would recover their investments. Maxwell would add significantly to his holdings, and his reputation for financial rescue rather than predation would be reinforced. There's one other matter, Patricia said carefully. Vanessa Reed has applied for a position with our HR department. Obviously, given your relationship with Vanguard, we wanted to consult you before responding. Maxwell considered this unexpected development. Her qualifications? Surprisingly relevant. Before her interior design business, she worked in corporate recruitment. Her references, excluding recent history, are strong. And she specifically applied to Vanguard. Knowing my connection? Howard nodded. That's what raised flags. It could be innocent. We're one of the few major firms without direct Sullivan exposure. Or it could be an attempt to access information about me. Maxwell completed the thought. Or perhaps simply a desperate move from someone whose options have narrowed considerably. How would you like us to proceed? Patricia asked. Maxwell thought carefully before responding. Review her application according to normal protocols. If she's qualified, interview her. But place her in a department with no access to information regarding my investments or activities. Howard raised an eyebrow. Surprisingly merciful, given the circumstances. Not mercy, Maxwell corrected. Pragmatism. Denying her employment because of our past would suggest I'm still affected by it. I'm not. This wasn't entirely true. Maxwell's systematic dismantling of Vanessa's life, through legal, financial, and social mechanisms, had been executed with cold precision. He had ensured she lost everything that mattered to her: status, wealth, reputation. Her current desperate circumstances were the direct result of his invisible orchestration. Yet true victory required indifference, not continued engagement. Maxwell's Phoenix strategy wasn't just about rebuilding his public empire, but about emerging from the ashes of his marriage transformed, stronger, more visible, and completely detached from the past. After dinner, Maxwell returned to Reed Tower, where his penthouse now occupied the top 3 floors of the completed portion. The space was dramatically different from his former home with Vanessa. Clean architectural lines, museum-quality art, and technological innovation throughout. It reflected his true aesthetic, no longer constrained by the facade of middle-class modesty. Leo was waiting in the private elevator lobby. Sorry to ambush you, but this couldn't wait. He handed Maxwell a folder. Vanessa reached out to Naomi today, requesting a meeting with you. Maxwell scanned the enclosed letter. Vanessa's carefully worded request cited closure and personal healing as reasons for the meeting. Interesting timing, Maxwell observed. The same day she applies to Vanguard. You think they're connected? Undoubtedly. The question is how. Maxwell entered his penthouse, Leo following. Her assets remain frozen, pending final restitution determinations. Her probability of securing comparable employment elsewhere is minimal given the publicity surrounding the case. She's seeking leverage. So you'll refuse the meeting? Maxwell poured 2 bourbons, handing one to Leo. On the contrary, I'll agree to it. Leo looked surprised. After everything she did, why give her the satisfaction? Because refusing suggests fear or lingering emotion. Neither applies. Maxwell sipped his bourbon. Additionally, I'm curious what strategy she's attempting. It could be genuine remorse, Leo suggested without conviction. Possible, but implausible. Vanessa's patterns suggest calculated self-interest rather than authentic accountability. 2 days later, Maxwell sat in a private room at the Peninsula Hotel, waiting. He'd chosen neutral territory for this meeting. Neither his space nor hers, but ground that conveyed his position of power while maintaining public visibility. Vanessa arrived precisely on time, and Maxwell had to admit she'd managed her appearance carefully despite reduced circumstances. Her clothing was understated, but quality, her makeup minimal, her demeanor subdued rather than entitled. "Thank you for meeting me," she began after declining his offer of refreshment. "I wasn't sure you would. I was curious about your purpose," Maxwell replied neutrally. Vanessa took a deep breath. "First, I want to apologize. My behavior during our marriage, especially toward the end, was inexcusable. The affair with Blake, the public humiliation at the restaurant. I've had a lot of time to reflect on my choices." Maxwell observed her performance with detached analysis. The contrition seemed well-rehearsed, though not necessarily insincere. "I appreciate your apology," he said simply. She looked momentarily thrown by his calm acceptance. "I expected more resistance. What would be the point? Our marriage is over. The legal consequences of subsequent events have been determined by appropriate authorities. There's nothing to debate. That's it." After 14 years together, Maxwell studied her. "What were you hoping for, Vanessa? Anger? Recriminations? Some demonstration that you still affect me emotionally?" Color rose in her cheeks. "I was hoping for a conversation between two people who shared a significant portion of their lives, not a corporate negotiation. Then perhaps you should have requested that conversation before pursuing a relationship with Blake Sullivan, not after its consequences have become untenable." The directness visibly unsettled her. "That's fair," she conceded. "But people make mistakes, Maxwell. Terrible ones. I've lost everything. My business, my home, my reputation. Actions have consequences," Maxwell observed dispassionately. "Your actions engineered those consequences." Vanessa's composed facade cracked. "Don't pretend you didn't orchestrate everything that happened to Blake and me. The SEC investigation, the media exposure, the asset seizures. It all started with you." Maxwell remained impassive. "Blake Sullivan committed securities fraud. You accepted funds without providing legitimate services. My actions merely ensured proper regulatory review. You could have just divorced me without destroying my entire life. I offered you a generous settlement. You chose to align yourself with a criminal instead." Vanessa struggled to regain composure. "Fine. Yes, I made catastrophic choices. But does that justify reducing me to nothing? I can't even rent an apartment without a co-signer now. Which brings us to your actual purpose," Maxwell said calmly. "You didn't request this meeting for closure. You want financial assistance." The accuracy of his assessment visibly deflated her. "Is that so terrible? To ask for help from someone who once cared about me? Not terrible. Simply predictable." Maxwell leaned forward slightly. "You're also applying to Vanguard Capital, where I have significant influence. Both approaches suggest you're seeking to leverage our past relationship rather than truly rebuilding independently. That's not fair. I applied to Vanguard because they're one of the few places not tainted by Blake's scandal. My qualifications are legitimate. I haven't interfered with your application," Maxwell assured her. "If you're qualified, you'll be considered accordingly." Vanessa looked genuinely surprised. "You haven't blocked me?" "No, nor will I. Your professional future is your own to determine." This unexpected response seemed to disarm her more than any rejection. "I don't understand. After everything that happened, you'd allow me to work at a company where you have influence? Your employment at Vanguard would be based on your qualifications and compartmentalized from any connection to me." Maxwell checked his watch. "Now, was there anything else you wanted to discuss?" Vanessa stared at him, reassessing. "You really have completely detached, haven't you? I'm just a closed chapter to you. We divorced over a year ago, Vanessa. I've moved forward. I recommend you do the same. Without resources, that's nearly impossible." Maxwell considered her argument dispassionately. I'll have Naomi review options for unfreezing a portion of your remaining assets for living expenses, pending completion of your restitution payments. A structured arrangement with appropriate oversight. Hope flashed across her face. You do that. It's pragmatic. Your inability to sustain yourself extends the legal proceedings unnecessarily. As they stood to conclude the meeting, Vanessa made one final attempt at emotional connection. I did love you once, Maxwell, before I got caught up in status and appearances. Maxwell regarded her with clinical detachment. Perhaps, but love without loyalty or respect is ultimately meaningless. I wish you well, Vanessa, but our paths won't cross again after today. He left her standing in the private dining room, feeling neither satisfaction nor animosity, only the clean finality of a chapter properly concluded. Later that evening, Maxwell received confirmation that Blake Sullivan's sentencing recommendation had been filed. The prosecutor was seeking 8 years based on the severity of the fraud, partially offset by his cooperation against other conspirators. Maxwell forwarded this information to Catherine Zhang with a brief message, background only. No attribution. Her reply came quickly. Understood. Running feature next week on financial ethics reforms inspired by the Sullivan case. Care to comment as industry leader. He smiled slightly at the transparent attempt to connect him publicly to Sullivan's downfall. Happy to discuss reform proposals generally. Specific cases best addressed by regulatory authorities. The Phoenix strategy was working precisely as designed. From the ashes of his intentionally modest former life, Maxwell had emerged fully formed in his true capacity. Powerful, visible, yet still maintaining careful control over his narrative. His revenge against Vanessa and Blake hadn't required direct confrontation or obvious attacks. He had simply arranged circumstances where their own flawed characters led inevitably to their downfall, while he rose higher with each calculated move. The silent partner had found his voice, and Chicago was listening. Chapter 8. The Final Reckoning. 18 months after the restaurant revelation, Maxwell stood on the observation deck of Reed Tower, surveying his domain. Chicago stretched before him, its skyline now permanently altered by his vision. Construction on the south wing is 2 weeks ahead of schedule, reported Alicia Brennan, his chief operating officer. The Reed Foundation offices will be ready for occupancy next month, and the community innovation spaces shortly after. Excellent. And the Adler building renovation. Preservation specialists have approved our adaptive reuse plan. We're maintaining 80% of the original structure while achieving LEED Platinum certification. Maxwell nodded approvingly. The Adler building symbolized his personal journey. The site where his father had once worked now transformed into a beacon of sustainable development without erasing its industrial heritage. His phone buzzed with a news alert. Breaking, Blake Sullivan sentenced to 7 years in federal prison for securities fraud. Justice delivered, precisely as anticipated. Maxwell had neither accelerated nor impeded the legal process. He had simply ensured Blake couldn't escape it through his usual channels of influence and obfuscation. One more item, Alicia said, checking her tablet. Catherine Zhang has requested an exclusive interview regarding the new Reed Media Group acquisition. Given your history with Chicago Society magazine, she's particularly interested in your decision to purchase its parent company. Schedule it for next week, and confirm our education initiative announcement to coincide with the interview. After Alicia departed, Maxwell remained on the observation deck, reflecting on the symmetry of recent developments. His acquisition of the media group that had once been Vanessa's social Bible represented the final piece of his reconstruction strategy, control of a narrative that had once controlled his ex-wife. His phone rang. Leo. Just heard about Sullivan's sentencing, his friend began. 7 years with possibility of parole after 5. Seems light considering the damage. It's appropriate, Maxwell replied. His cooperation helped dismantle 2 other fraudulent operations. Always the pragmatist, Leo chuckled. Speaking of pragmatism, Vanessa's employment at Vanguard is working out surprisingly well. Howard says she's actually quite skilled in their talent acquisition division. Unsurprising. Her social intuition was always exceptional. You really don't care that she's working at a company where you have significant influence? Maxwell considered the question. Her compartmentalized role poses no risk to my interests, and her rehabilitation serves the broader administrative efficiency of concluding legal matters. That's cold, even for you. Practical, Maxwell corrected. Holding grudges requires emotional energy better directed elsewhere. Leo snorted. Says the man who meticulously dismantled two people's entire lives over a restaurant insult. That wasn't a grudge, Leo. It was a necessary recalibration of circumstances. The conversation shifted to business matters, concluding with plans for the upcoming Reed Foundation Gala, the same charity event where Maxwell had first noticed Blake Sullivan's interest in Vanessa 2 years earlier. The circularity wasn't lost on him. Later that afternoon, Maxwell met with Howard Kessler at the Chicago Club to discuss Vanguard's management of certain Reed Group assets. Their business concluded efficiently. Howard hesitated before leaving. I should mention, your ex-wife has been promoted to Associate Director of Executive Recruitment. She's been remarkably effective, especially with candidates who might be intimidated by our traditional approach. I'm glad it's working out, Maxwell replied neutrally. Howard studied him. She's been discreet. Never mentions your history or tries to leverage the connection. As expected, she's rebuilding her life pragmatically. She asks about you occasionally. Nothing inappropriate, just general questions about your public projects. Seems genuinely interested in your success. Maxwell absorbed this information without visible reaction. Professional curiosity, I'm sure. Howard looked unconvinced. Maybe, though she declined an opportunity to relocate to our New York office recently. Said she preferred to remain in Chicago despite the complicated history. Her reasons are her own. After Howard departed, Maxwell considered this new information. Vanessa declining career advancement to remain in Chicago was unexpected, potentially indicating unresolved emotional attachment rather than purely pragmatic career calculations. The thought was interrupted by another call, this time from Naomi Parker. The Sullivan Restitution Fund is finalized, she reported. Your anonymous contribution of $10 million ensures all smaller investors will be made whole. Good. Maintain the anonymity protocols. Of course, though I'm curious, why help his victims quietly when public philanthropy would boost the Reed Foundation profile? This isn't about profile, Maxwell explained. It's about proper resolution. Small investors shouldn't suffer for trusting the wrong advisor. The truth was more complex. Maxwell's contribution to the restitution fund served multiple strategic purposes. It demonstrated his commitment to market integrity, provided tax advantages through the foundation, and most importantly, it placed a final period on the Sullivan saga. Blake Sullivan's crime and punishment would be complete. The victims would be compensated. The story would end without lingering victims seeking justice, which might keep Blake's name in the news or, worse, generate sympathy for him. Maxwell had learned from his father's financial destruction that true closure required restoration, not just punishment. His revenge against Blake wasn't complete until the collateral damage was addressed. That evening, Maxwell attended a symphony gala alone, one of many social events he now navigated as one of Chicago's most eligible bachelors. His strategic self-revelation had brought unexpected attention from potential romantic partners, none of whom he'd found compelling enough to pursue seriously. During intermission, he encountered Dominic and Elaine Russell in the grand foyer. Maxwell, Elaine greeted him warmly. The Education Initiative announcement is wonderful. $20 million for STEM programs in underserved schools will make a tremendous difference. Research shows early intervention creates the greatest long-term impact, Maxwell replied. Always the calculated philanthropist, Dominic observed good-naturedly. Though I suspect there's more heart behind it than you admit. Their conversation was interrupted by a ripple of awareness through the crowd. Maxwell turned to see Vanessa entering with a distinguished older man he recognized as Richard Townsend, chairman of the symphony board. Interesting, Dominic murmured. First time she's been seen at a major event since the scandal. Elaine touched Maxwell's arm gently. We can move to another area if you prefer. No need, Maxwell replied calmly. Our paths occasionally crossing at public events is inevitable. He observed Vanessa discreetly, noting the subtle differences in her appearance and demeanor. She was dressed elegantly, but conservatively, her manner more reserved than in the past. The entitled socialite had been replaced by someone more subdued, more conscious of perception. When her gaze inevitably found him across the room, Maxwell acknowledged her with a slight nod, the minimal courtesy appropriate between distant acquaintances. She returned the gesture similarly before continuing her conversation with Townsend. "Remarkably civilized," Dominic commented. "Civilization distinguishes us from chaos," Maxwell replied. "Excuse me, I see the Vanguard board chairman has arrived." As he moved through the crowd, Maxwell felt an unexpected moment of clarity. His meticulous revenge strategy against Vanessa and Blake had succeeded completely. Their lives permanently altered, their status demolished, their futures constrained by consequences of their own making. Yet watching Vanessa cautiously rebuilding her life, carefully navigating the social world that had once embraced and then rejected her, Maxwell recognized that his victory was not in their destruction, but in his own liberation. He had emerged from the facade of his previous existence, fully formed in his authentic power, no longer constrained by the protective camouflage of perceived mediocrity. The bell signaling the end of intermission chimed, and Maxwell returned to his seat, alone but no longer hidden. That was his true revenge, not what he had taken from them, but what he had reclaimed for himself, the freedom to exist without pretense. 2 days later, Maxwell sat across from Catherine Zhang in his Reed Tower office for their scheduled interview about the Media Group acquisition. "The purchase of Metropolitan Media surprised industry observers," Catherine began, "particularly given your history with one of their publications." "Chicago Society, you mean?" Maxwell noted. "An incidental connection. The acquisition was based on broader strategic alignment with Reed Group's community development initiatives." Catherine's skeptical expression suggested she wasn't convinced. "Your ex-wife once described that magazine as her social Bible. Now you control it." Metropolitan's 12 publications serve diverse communities across Chicago. Their combined reach makes them valuable platforms for highlighting neighborhood revitalization efforts. Speaking of revitalization, Catherine shifted topics seamlessly. Blake Sullivan's sentencing closes a significant chapter in Chicago's financial history. "Any comment on the outcome?" Maxwell maintained his neutral expression. "The legal system worked as designed. Beyond that, my focus remains on constructive development, not past controversies. Even when those controversies directly impacted your personal life?" "Especially then," Maxwell replied. "Moving forward productively requires focusing on creation rather than grievance." When the interview concluded, Catherine lingered. "Off the record, your transformation from invisible power broker to Chicago's most visible business leader has been remarkable. Yet I still sense there's a story behind the story." Maxwell allowed a slight smile. "Isn't there always?" "The timing of your emergence, coinciding perfectly with your divorce and Sullivan's downfall. It's too neat to be coincidental. The universe often presents patterns that suggest design where there is only convergence." Catherine laughed. "And sometimes there's a master strategist behind those patterns. One day, I hope you'll tell me the whole truth." "One day," Maxwell agreed non-committally when the story is complete. Later that evening, as Maxwell reviewed architectural plans for the Adler Building renovation, he received an unexpected delivery. A small package with no return address. Inside was a worn steel mill worker's identification badge with his father's name and photo, accompanied by a simple note, found while clearing old storage at the Adler Building. "Thought you should have this. V." Maxwell studied the badge, his father's proud expression captured decades ago, before economic devastation claimed his livelihood and dignity. The unexpected gesture from Vanessa stirred complex emotions, her perception in recognizing the badge's significance suggesting deeper understanding than he'd credited her with. After a moment's reflection, Maxwell placed the badge carefully in his desk drawer and returned to his work. The past, both distant and recent, was acknowledged but not dwelled upon. His focus remained on the empire he was building in plain sight, the strategic moves still to come, and the legacy he would establish. The final reckoning wasn't about punishment delivered or vengeance achieved. It was about transcending the very need for revenge by creating something far greater than what had been lost. Chapter 9. The Silent Legacy. 5 years after the restaurant revelation, Maxwell Reed stood before the crowd gathered for the grand opening of Adler's Center, the fully renovated and reimagined industrial complex where his father had once worked. What had been a crumbling reminder of economic devastation was now a thriving mixed-use development combining affordable housing, technical education facilities, and incubator spaces for manufacturing startups. Progress doesn't require erasing history. Maxwell concluded his remarks. The Adler Center preserves our industrial heritage while creating new opportunities for the next generation of builders and creators. The applause was genuine, the atmosphere celebratory. In the 5 years since emerging from the shadows, Maxwell had transformed Chicago's urban landscape and business culture. Reed Tower anchored a revitalized downtown district. The Reed Restaurant Group had expanded nationally, and the Reed Foundation's education initiatives had become models for urban renewal across the country. Blake Sullivan remained in federal prison, his release still 2 years away. His cooperation had helped dismantle several other fraudulent investment operations, but his own reputation and future prospects were permanently diminished. The financial ecosystem he had exploited now operated under reforms partially shaped by Maxwell's influence on regulatory committees. As Maxwell mingled with guests following the ceremony, he spotted a familiar face among the crowd. Vanessa, accompanying Richard Townsend, now her husband of 2 years. Their paths crossed occasionally at civic events, their interactions unfailingly professional and distant. Remarkable achievement, Townsend said, approaching with Vanessa beside him. The preservation of the original forge elements while incorporating modern sustainability features is inspired. Thank you, Richard. The architectural team deserves the credit for the execution. But the vision was yours, Vanessa said quietly. You always understood the value of foundations. The observation was unexpectedly perceptive, acknowledging Maxwell's core philosophy without presuming intimacy. He nodded slightly, accepting the comment at face value. The Townsend Foundation's arts education program would complement the technical training facilities here, Richard suggested. Perhaps our teams should discuss potential collaboration. I'll have Alicia reach out to your director, Maxwell agreed. The brief exchange concluded with professional courtesy, Vanessa and Richard moving on to greet other attendees. Maxwell watched them go, noting the changes in his ex-wife. The performative social butterfly replaced by someone more substantive, more authentic in her community engagement. Leo appeared at his side. Civilized exchange with the former Mrs. Reed. Her foundation work with Townsend is legitimate, Maxwell noted. Their arts education programs show promising results. Remarkable rehabilitation from social parasite to philanthropic partner, Leo observed. Almost as if someone orchestrated the perfect punishment, stripping away her superficial existence to reveal whatever authentic potential remained. Maxwell raised an eyebrow. An interesting theory. Am I wrong? You're overestimating my influence. Vanessa's transformation is her own achievement. After you systematically dismantled her previous life, Leo pointed out, creating conditions where reinvention was her only viable option. Maxwell considered this perspective. Perhaps, though true change requires internal commitment, not just external pressure. Their conversation was interrupted by Dominic Russell, now chief of neurosurgery and a Reed Foundation board member. The educational facilities are extraordinary, Maxwell. The simulation technology will revolutionize technical training. Technology without purpose is just distraction, Maxwell replied. The Adler Center's success will be measured by the careers it launches, not its equipment. As the event continued, Maxwell found himself drawn to the preserved section of the original steel mill, a cavernous space where massive equipment had been refurbished and maintained as industrial sculpture. Here, his father had once operated a blast furnace, working punishing hours to support his family. In a quiet moment alone, Maxwell removed something from his pocket, his father's ID badge, the one Vanessa had returned years earlier. He placed it discreetly on a small shelf beside the restored control panel, a private tribute invisible to casual observers. A fitting tribute, came a voice behind him. Maxwell turned to find Catherine Zhang observing him. After 5 years of covering his business ventures, she had developed an uncanny ability to locate him during reflective moments. My father would have appreciated the resurrection of this place, Maxwell acknowledged. From abandonment to opportunity, Catherine noted. A pattern you've repeated across your projects. Transformation rather than destruction. Except when destruction serves your purpose, she observed shrewdly. Your former wife seems to have found her footing. Sullivan less so. Maxwell studied the perceptive journalist. You're still pursuing the theory that I orchestrated their downfall. Not pursuing, accepting as established fact. The question that interests me is why the difference in outcomes. Sullivan remains destroyed, while Vanessa has been allowed, perhaps even subtly assisted, in rebuilding a life of substance. An intriguing narrative, Maxwell replied neutrally. The truth, I suspect. Catherine's expression turned thoughtful. Sullivan betrayed his investors, strangers who trusted him with their financial futures. Vanessa betrayed her husband, one person who trusted her with his heart. In your moral calculation, one crime warranted permanent destruction, the other merely painful transformation. Maxwell remained silent, neither confirming nor denying her assessment. Your silence speaks volumes, Catherine said. The profile I'm writing for the 5th anniversary of Reed Tower will explore your business philosophy. I'm calling it The Silent Legacy, how your father's experience shaped your approach to power and responsibility. An ambitious angle. The most interesting part, Catherine continued, is how someone capable of such calculated retribution could simultaneously build one of the most progressive business empires in the country. Ruthlessness and vision, perfectly balanced. Principles without power accomplish nothing, Maxwell observed. Power without principles destroys everything, including those who betray your trust, Catherine concluded. A lesson Blake Sullivan learned permanently, while Vanessa received. What? A second chance. Everyone receives the consequences their actions create, Maxwell replied. My role has simply been to ensure those natural consequences aren't artificially avoided through privilege or connection. As Catherine departed with this cryptic exchange to ponder, Maxwell remained in the preserved industrial space, contemplating the journey of the past 5 years. His revenge against Blake and Vanessa had been meticulously executed, but with fundamentally different purposes. Blake Sullivan represented a predatory system Maxwell had determined to eliminate. His destruction was necessary for broader market reform and investor protection. Vanessa's transformation served as both justice for her betrayal and validation of Maxwell's original assessment of her potential buried beneath social climbing and status obsession. Later that evening, Maxwell hosted a smaller gathering in his Reed Tower penthouse for close associates and foundation board members. As conversations flowed around business initiatives and community impacts, Dominic Russell joined him on the terrace overlooking the illuminated city. 5 years of visible empire building, Dominic observed, versus how many years of invisible foundation laying? Nearly 20, Maxwell acknowledged, though the public emergence wasn't originally part of the plan. No? What changed? Maxwell considered how much to reveal. Let's just say certain events accelerated my timeline. The restaurant incident, Dominic nodded. Still the most masterfully executed response to public humiliation I've ever witnessed. It wasn't about the humiliation, Maxwell corrected. It was about recognizing that my strategic anonymity had outlived its purpose. And nothing to do with your ex-wife's betrayal? Dominic's skepticism was evident. That provided timing, not motivation. Dominic studied him thoughtfully. You know, most men in your position would have simply divorced her and moved on. The systematic dismantling of her social world, her lover's business empire, their reputations and futures, that suggests something deeper. Pattern correction, Maxwell explained. Their behavior represented systemic flaws in our financial and social structures. The valorization of appearance over substance, extraction over creation. Addressing those patterns required comprehensive intervention. So not revenge, but what? Social engineering. Restoration of proper balance. Dominic laughed softly. Remind me never to cross you, Maxwell. Your definition of balance is terrifying. As the evening concluded and guests departed, Maxwell remained alone on his terrace, contemplating the city he had helped reshape. 5 years of visible power had accomplished more than 20 years of silent influence, confirming his decision to emerge from the shadows. Blake Sullivan would eventually leave prison to face a world where his name remained synonymous with financial fraud, his future prospects permanently constrained by his past actions. Vanessa had found a more authentic path forward, her painful transformation yielding genuine growth, exactly as Maxwell had calculated when arranging the specific consequences of her betrayal. Maxwell himself had transcended his original revenge motivation, creating a legacy that extended far beyond personal vindication. The restaurant revelation had been merely the opening move in a far more significant game, the complete reconstruction of his public identity and influence. His father's ID badge now rested permanently in the preserved industrial space where generations of workers would learn new skills. The steelworker's son had fulfilled his silent promise, building something that could never be taken away, while ensuring those who betrayed trust faced the precise consequences their characters had earned. The final victory wasn't the destruction he had orchestrated, but the creation that followed, a legacy built in plain sight, no longer hidden behind carefully constructed modesty. That transformation from silent partner to visible force represented his true revenge against a world that had underestimated him and those who had betrayed him. Maxwell Reed had emerged from the shadows not by becoming someone new, but by finally revealing who he had been all along.